Good morning. Welcome to the Point. A year from today, we'll know who the candidates for governor will be for decision 2018 in the general election. The primary will have just been held. We'll know who the Democrat is, the Republican, the third-party candidates, and potentially even an independent candidate. In the past few weeks here on our show, we've talked to at least 4 people who either are or may consider running for governor. This morning we continue with Republican Senator Patrick Colbeck in his second term in the state Senate. He talked to us about policy, politics, and why he's running. Senator, you've been here before. You've been here for a town hall meeting. You've been on the show before. But let's start with the very beginning for people who may not know who you are. Talk about the part of the state you come from, who you are, and why you want to run for governor.
Well, I appreciate that opportunity. Great to be with you, Rick. I have a little bit different background than a lot of the folks that go up to Lansing. My background's in aerospace engineering. And I got my bachelor's and master's degree in aerospace engineering from the University of Michigan. Went on to study at the International Space University in Strasbourg, France, where one of my instructors was actually Buzz Aldrin. From there, I went on to work for the Boeing company on the International Space Station. I'm responsible for designing several of the subsystems on board the International Space Station. I'm glad to say astronauts are all doing very well, and we're treating them very well. And I worked on the airlock module as well, which involved a lot of cooperation with some international partners. So it's a little bit different perspective on things. I actually taught at Space Camp too, so I had a lot of fun doing that. Then came back to Michigan and was a management consultant for over 11 years. In the last 6 years, independent consultant, so I actually ran my own small business. And when we decided to run for politics, I put all that on hold. My wife and I liquidated all our retirement savings, felt called to go off and serve. And we ran for the state Senate for the first time back in 2010 without any previous political experience, and beat 4 former state representatives to become the first person elected directly into the Senate without any previous political experience in over 3 decades.
Let's talk a little bit about that time in the Senate, because you have been an outspoken voice for largely conservative themes in the Senate. Not always one that has prevailed, but certainly one that has been heard. How has that impacted your view of public service, understanding the way the Senate works, because it takes consensus. It can't always be that lone voice. Yeah,
I've become a little bit cynical about what actually drives some of the decisions that are made up in Lansing, I must admit. That hasn't stopped me from making sure that we take principled stands on issues like when we were out here last time, which was around Medicaid expansion, and which is Section 2001 of Obamacare, and we rebranded it as Healthy Michigan. But I stood up in opposition against that, and you know, that opposition is warranted, because right now Healthy Michigan is on its deathbed, with or without any changes up in D.C. Healthy Michigan is not so healthy. In 2020, there's provisions in that bill that will enforce the automatic repeal of that legislation, because it does not have the projected savings that were put in place, and Senate Fiscal projects that those savings are going to go negative in 2020, which automatically repeals it. So those stands, you know, they maybe at that point in time, they weren't treated well with some of the folks that were in the power broker seats, but I think what you've seen with me is a history of actually being on the right side of the issues. It just may take a little bit longer for the powers that be in Lansing to turn around to that side. I was also out here, I think, on a roads debate out here as well, and that was kind of frustrating here, because we had 81% of the voters say no to a tax increase on the roads. And what happened? 2 months later, legislature came back and put out another tax increase, this time without a vote of the people. And that shows from my perspective, shows a lot of disrespect for the electorate. And I put out solutions. And when I say no, just like I did on Medicaid expansion and I did on the roads, this engineer in me says we're going to go off and propose a better solution. I did for the health care, and now we're actually doing that in the state budget. So actually, you know, been successful at getting a direct primary care Medicaid pilot here in the state of Michigan, which targets our single largest line item in the state budget, $18 billion. And actually the people of Grand Rapids in this viewing area are going to benefit quite a bit from it, because we've got 2 direct primary care practices that just opened up recently. I've been at grand openings for both. One is Christian Healthcare Centers, and the other is Direct Primary Care of West Michigan. Both of those have opened up in the last 2 months, and they would be eligible for participation in this pilot, which essentially takes care of people on Medicaid with low income and provides them better care. And when you keep people out of the hospital, it lowers the overall cost of care and saves taxpayers in this case, because they're Medicaid, a lot of money. On the roads, I push for alternative road solutions that didn't require any tax increases. They focus on upgrading our roads to higher quality roads. And if you do that, not only do you see the orange barrels less often, but the roads last longer and we spend less money on maintaining them.
I want to talk to you about the politics of this, but since we're already on policy, let's talk about that roads program. There were some really deeply seated problems with the ballot initiative that went forward. It became a catch-all for trying to make a lot of people happy in order to get it through the legislative process to get it on the ballot, and that was at least part of the problem with it. When you came back into the legislative solution for it, it became kind of a battle cry for some people who said, we said no to this plan. Well, it wasn't exactly that plan that they said no to. I mean, there were certainly differences. So is it a question of not wanting to spend more money, from your perspective, on roads, or not wanting to spend more money after we just said we didn't like the plan? Because the roads in Michigan, and I get to travel a fair amount, and I'm not going to try to be an expert, but they're at least as bad as anywhere else, if not worse.
There's no debate over the quality of the roads and the fact that we need to fix the roads. I get you there, but in that Proposal 1, when it was first put out to the voters, I think only about $400 million out of the $2 billion that was going to be collected in the first year were actually going to go to fix the roads. And I can tell you it was not about fixing the roads. And you want evidence of that. Look what happened after we passed the $600 million tax increase via gas taxes and vehicle registration fees. Immediately after the passage of that legislation, they repurposed $400 million in general fund money that had been put towards transportation and used it to backfill potholes and Medicaid expansion assumptions. It was never about the roads. It was a bait and switch from the beginning. And if you want to know why I'm sometimes unpopular up in Lansing, it's because I have a spreadsheet. I'm not afraid to use it. I'm going to go into the details, and I haven't forgotten who I serve, which is the people of Michigan, not the special interests up in Lansing.
When you think about the biggest issues that face the state, you've probably talked about a couple of them. When you talk about healthcare, which is obviously primary for everybody, roads, which are essential for every business, but beyond those things, what are the things that drive you to run?
There's a lot of things. Making sure that we return power back to the people, and that gets this limited government mindset. And the way that manifests itself is by pursuing policies like eliminating the income tax. I mean, for me, everybody's sitting there saying we'd like to reduce the income tax. I get it. But let's go off and define a pragmatic path that says let's figure out a way to go off and do this without impacting schools or taking money away from police or fire. There are ways of going off and doing it. One of it involves health care. And if we would get lump sum block grants from Medicaid from the federal government, when we save 20% on an $18 billion line item, which is Medicaid, that's $3.5 billion that could be used for other purposes, like reducing our income tax rate here in the state of Michigan. There's a lot of other alternatives. I'm going to be putting out an editorial on a pragmatic, milestone-driven approach to actually reducing and eliminating the income tax. And oh, by the way, you eliminate the income tax, you eliminate that senior pension tax as well, which is a big deal. So there's broad-based economic development for me is important. And that means that if you lower the cost of health care in the state by 20%, you lower electricity costs by broadening electric choice to all of our citizens, not just 10%, where they can save 20% on the cost of electricity. You lower the income tax. You don't need special incentives that pick winners and losers like we did with this good so-called good jobs bill or the Gilbert bills that were passed beforehand. What you can do is start creating an environment where people say, let's go to Michigan. I don't have to do extra paperwork to justify my tax incentives or grants. They just have a good business environment, which is good for everybody, not just the big boys, but the guys in small business as well.
Help me with the income tax, because the income tax is at 4.1%?
4.25%.
4.25%.
Takes in about $9.7 billion net every year.
Which is a big chunk of cash.
It is.
If you think of it in terms of the general fund, if all of that money went directly into the general fund, that would be almost the entire general fund, which is the disposable, not disposable. It's the part of the budget that the legislature has the most flexibility with when it comes down to it. So if you eliminated that, first of all, you'd have to figure out that impact and how you're going to make that up.
You're right.
How does that then, if I understood what you were talking about, attract business? Because that is a personal income tax that doesn't necessarily add up to an incentive for a Foxconn or someplace like that.
No, but it does add up to an incentive for mom and pop small engine repair shop or a marina or somebody like that. the folks that are in these LLCs and sole proprietorships, where they're actually, when we talk about job growth, the engine for job growth is small business. We've already taken care of some of the big boys. I actually led the effort to make Michigan the 24th right to work state, and essentially what that does is, 50% of site selection consultants for these big companies, when they want to set up manufacturing shops, they look at whether or not you're right to work, and if you're not, they take you off the list. We took care of that with the passage of that, and we also returned freedom of assembly back to our rank and file members here. So that was a big deal. That, from my perspective, creates an environment where we're prioritizing the best interests of all of our citizens, including our rank and file workers. That was taken care of. When you go off and lower the income tax rate, you lower the cost of health care, you lower the cost of electricity, now you're getting stuff that's not just benefiting small business owners, but you're also benefiting all of our families as well. That's the type of policy we should be swinging for the fences on, instead of this nickel and diamond stuff for the big boys.
I'm not going to let you take out your spreadsheet, but
Yeah.
briefly, if you take $9 billion out of the economy of
Yeah.
state government, do you have a way to replace that $9 billion, or do you do that through cost savings, or do you generate more revenue? How does that work?
You do it through cost savings and economic growth. When you actually go off and look at the economic growth part of it, every time you've got somebody, we got about 250,000 people that are sitting there on government assistance right now, and then we'd have to attract another 250,000 people into the state for a total of 500,000 new well-paying jobs on it. So you take them off the government assistance on it. That counts for over $1 billion of that 9.7. It's not the whole enchilada, so some people point to Kansas, and if you just do this only growth approach on it, I get it. That's never going to go off and work. But there is a growth component to what happens when you actually incentivize the job growth at the small business level, which is what we do. You can also get it through enforcement of when we actually go off and upgrade all of our roads to higher quality roads, and I've outlined how you could do it for 15% upfront increase in costs, but in the end, the roads last 3 to 4 times as long. Your overall maintenance cost when all the roads are upgraded is actually less than what we're paying today. That's another almost $1 billion worth of savings. When you actually go off and look at fraud abuse, right now we've got something called a zapper on sales tax, where people will ring up there would be a $5 transaction, but they only ring up a $4 transaction. Lashish restaurants, I don't know if you're familiar with this, about a few years ago, they were caught with their hand in the kitty funneling $20 million out to Hamas. And they did this via this zapper technology. When I was working with Senator Papa George, he had projected that there was almost $1 billion in uncollected sales tax here in the state of Michigan around these cash transactions for these zappers. It's a real issue. It's something that just enforcing the existing law would actually bring in additional revenue. And there's a lot of other options, like applying that direct primary care-based medical approach or medical system to government employees. You start saving $280 million for applying it to state employees. And so there's a lot of opportunities to go off and save money that we haven't even looked at. And I even started looking at the 344 restricted funds we have in the state of Michigan. So the key is having a constancy of purpose, having an objective, and having an appreciation for the principle that anytime that we have a tough time prioritizing funds and we just go off and increase taxes up at the state, all we do is push that prioritization discussion to the kitchen tables around our state, and that's not fair, that's not right.
We have about a minute left, and so we've spent the whole time talking about policy, which means this is a success. Let's talk about the politics quickly. We believe the Attorney General will run for the nomination. We believe the Lieutenant Governor. I say that because neither one of them have come on the show and said, yes, I am running. You are running.
Absolutely.
In about 45 seconds. What makes you get into this race?
Well, I think number one, the most recent poll of Michigan primary voters that I've seen had 62% of the voters undecided. My name was not on that list. The Attorney General and Lieutenant Governor were. You can't say that there's an issue of name recognition with them. They've been out there, and what it tells me is that the people are seeing what's on the shelf and they're not buying. And so I think that's a huge opportunity for us. We have, as I talked about before, we've been counted as a long shot before, but people resonate with our message because we have a track record of actually serving them. Once people understand that they have had somebody actually fighting for them over the last 7 years in state politics and taking a hit as a result of it, they're going to understand that that's what they want in the governorship, and I look forward to serving the people of Michigan in that capacity.
As you heard us discuss, at least two other big-name Republicans are expected to get in the race, Lieutenant Governor Brian Calley and Attorney General Bill Schuette, and there are other Republicans who are running as well. Same is true on the Democratic side with any number of people who are running there, including former state Senator Gretchen Whitmer. In just a moment, you'll meet another Democrat who would like to become his party's nominee when we return to the point. Welcome back to the Point. We are talking to people who are running for governor here in the state of Michigan. We know some of these folks will get on the primary ballot next year. Likely some of them will not. We'll continue to watch and see who qualifies. But in the meantime, introducing you to some candidates who don't come from a political background, like our next guest, Democrat Sri Thanedar, who talks about his quest to become governor. First of all, tell me about your background, where you've been, what you've done, and what brings you to run for governor.
Rick, I'm a scientist primarily and an entrepreneur, having started businesses. Grew up in southern India, got a bachelor's in chemistry, a master's in chemistry, worked at the Atomic Research Center in India, and then wanted to come over to US and got a PhD at University of Akron in Ohio, came to University of Michigan in 1982 to be a postdoctoral scholar. I was at the University of Michigan for 2 years doing innovation, doing research. And then in '84, I got a job out of state in St. Louis, Missouri. Worked there as a chemist for 6 years, started a business, created hundreds of jobs. So that's who I am, a small businessman.
So what takes a man with all of that academic achievement and your own business achievement, what makes you say, I want to be governor of the state of Michigan?
Well, there is a lot that I bring to the table. One, being a scientist. Now we see a lot of climate control issues, clean air issues, clean water issues. We have seen what happened in Flint, and that's science. We see the crumbling bridges and repairs, that's engineering and science. So there is a lot of science, more than we may realize. And the executive experience, having run small businesses. Now, I did not run big billion-dollar businesses. It was all creating small businesses from ground up, and hundreds of jobs, but every job that I created that in United States of America. Not a single job I outsourced.
When you look at some of those issues you brought up, obviously, as a chemist, as somebody who understands the nature of some of the problems in Flint that you brought up, in the Flint water crisis. And you mentioned on your website and in some of your information that one of the things you would do would be implement scientific-based approaches to taking care of the issues in Flint. Do you have specifics? Do you know what you would want to do there?
Absolutely, yes. So as you know, as a scientist, I would look at things in a more impartial way. I will look at the facts, I will look at the data. I would make common sense, pragmatic solutions. So that's what my focus is going to be. Whether it's Flint, where so far we have only replaced close to 1,000 supply lines. We have 16,000 of these, and at this rate it's going to take 15, 20 years to do this. So we really keeping the Great Lakes clean. There is a lot of issues, science related, that we need to take good, long-term decisions with good vision, and we need to rebuild Michigan, and we want to get Michigan ready, whether it's education, whether it's infrastructure. We need to really focus on what does Michigan look like 5 years down the road? What does Michigan looks like 10 years down the road? And what do we need to do this year to make that happen? So it's more about having a vision as a leader, as a progressive, pragmatic, common sense leader, and then communicating this vision to my team. I would get absolutely the best possible team I can put together as a governor, and we will implement this vision over the next years to make Michigan strong again, creating good paying jobs. Our wages are stagnant. We want to make sure that we focus on people and invest in people, whether it is developing skills, away from the corporate welfare that we see today. Our governor is much more focused on the big corporations, the billion-dollar corporations, giving them millions, hundreds of millions of dollars of incentives. And my focus is going to be focusing on people, creating that opportunities, affordable education, vocational school, trade school, so that people can acquire the skills to improve their quality of life.
When you talk about bringing a team together and looking for these really outcomes-based decisions is what it sounds like you're looking for, I'm always taken, sitting at this desk or one like it for the better part of 40 years, people who come from the private sector, and we've seen a lot of that, who want to bring that kind of pragmatic skill into government, understanding that there's still a bureaucracy. There are 110 folks over in the House and 38 over in the Senate, and you've got to get them to go along with those ideas too. How do you approach that, understanding that you may come at it from maybe an apolitical position when it comes to some of those solutions, understanding there's a lot of politics that gets played in Lansing?
Absolutely. You know, I have worked with different types of people. I've seen the world. I have seen. So our current governor came into his position thinking that these legislators will be like his employees, that he could, you know, boss around, and that didn't happen. That doesn't work. We really need to have a lot of give and take. I need to understand what each of the legislators have, their needs, their hot button, what are the needs of their constituents and their members, and then work with. And there has to be some give and take, not a gridlock. Gridlock is not going to get us anywhere. And that's what, you know, a lot of times we see career politicians, ideological, you know, we try to demonize the other side and we accomplish nothing. You know, all we do is passionate speeches and make the other person look bad, and that gets us nowhere. We need to really solve people's problems, and that's what I will be focused on. I'm very practical, I'm very pragmatic. And so it's a matter of just sitting down and putting together, like the Healthy Michigan, for instance, is a good example. And I give a lot of credit to Governor Rick Snyder. You know, he made sure that we expand Medicaid. He put together a coalition, got that passed, and that helped cover a lot of Michiganders. 97% of our children today are able to see a doctor. So those kind of situations, that's how we need to make things happen. It has to be a win-win. And that means I offer some, there could be a carrot and there could be a stick, and there could be sometimes I had to fight and be strong, and sometimes I have to give a little.
We are, and I apologize for this, we're almost out of time, and I hope you will come back and see us as this campaign goes along. I know you're getting ready to go to the UP.
Yes.
By the time this airs, you will have already been there. Got about 30 seconds. If you were going to knock on somebody's door today and tell them why you should be the next governor of Michigan, what would you say?
Well, you know, I'm going to say that I'm a proud Democrat. I believe in good quality jobs. I want to improve the education. I want to invest in Michigan. I want to invest in Michigan. I want to create skilled jobs, and I want to create the skill and make education affordable for Michiganders.
So a year before we know who will even be on the ballot, we're starting to meet a lot of folks who think they want to be the next governor of Michigan. And of course, there's a lot more to talk about in the world of politics and government. More next. To the point. So here we are in August, a time that should be slower for political reporters, but it's not necessarily proving to be so. It's another reason that I hope you will join me every Sunday morning as we talk about government and politics right here, 10 o'clock on Wood TV 8 for To the Point.